Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. It is exactly 8:38 a.m. and I understand that we do have Naim Jina online. We are going to be talking about NATO's continued stance or stand for the Ukraine for as long as it takes, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum to you, Naeem. Welcome to the program. I'm so glad that you could manage to get yourself away from behind the pots and politics on a plate to talk with us this morning. How are you?
Walaikum salam. I'm good, alhamdulillah. I'm good. The pots
Nice,
are good
nice.
too.
Pardon, you were saying something about the pots and politics
I
on a
think the,
plate?
the, the, the pots are good too.
Watching you very closely, and one of the days when I do meet with you, I'll tell you about all the mistakes you've made. Um,
In the cooking or in the politics?
in the cooking, no one can touch you on the politics. I'm only kidding. I think you're doing a fine job. You're definitely a way better cook than I am anyway. So yeah, I must give it a try. I must give some of those dishes a try. I keep promising, but it hasn't gotten to that yet. But on a serious note, Naim, NATO's released a press statement saying that they will continue to stand for Ukraine for as long as it takes. They go on to say, and I quote, "We will not back down." And this, of course, is Mr. Stoltenberg in a speech in Bucharest yesterday. He also went on to say that the only way to get the right terms for a negotiation to begin would be for Ukraine to advance on the battlefield. That kind of sounds a bit extreme, which would also mean more loss of life, more infrastructure damage, and more displacement. Your thoughts?
No, I agree with you. I think that the Ukrainian people in general have become fodder in a bigger battle. And as much as people might say that there's kind of glorious resistance from Ukrainians or whatever your position might be on this issue, the reality is that for both NATO powers and for Russia, the Ukrainian people are, a proxy or the fodder for a bigger battle between the two of them. And what Stoltenberg said yesterday, it kind of rings hollow in some ways. So on the one hand, of course, they're committing more non-lethal aid. But in terms of weaponry, the Ukrainians are being told by NATO that they should slow down in terms of how much of weaponry they're using because, frankly, NATO countries, both in Europe and the United States, are not able to keep up. They also don't want to supply Ukraine with the kind of weaponry that they're asking for. Now, I'm not saying that they should. I'm just saying that there's a kind of double speak here, where they, make these muscular statements as Stoltenberg did, but they're not able to back it up fully. And secondly, some of the rhetoric really is laughable. And so to say, for example, that Russia is using winter as a weapon of war, it's like, on the one hand, you trying to fuel a conflict, which if you listen to Stoltenberg's speech, that's exactly what he's doing, fueling the conflict, saying that, this is not going to end soon, basically, until Ukraine is dominant on the battlefield, saying also, reaffirming that Ukraine's application to join NATO will be favorably considered, which of course we all know is a red flag for Russia. So saying all these kind of aggressive things, and then whining like a child and saying that Russia is using winter as a weapon of war. If you're going to war, then strategic considerations about climate and the weather, etc., all part of that calculation. So I think that there's a lot of double speak from NATO, and as long as NATO countries themselves are not suffering in this war, it seems to me that they don't really care too much.
Mm. Surprisingly, that, well, look, it's 9 months on. I don't think anyone expected for the war to go on this long. What do you believe should have been done on the part of the Ukrainians to have stopped this war? It's all but devastated some of their major cities. We spoke about the displacement of people. Of course, other European countries have willingly accepted the Ukrainian people because they are blue-eyed and blonde-headed. Um, so they are most welcome in any European country. But with it comes a whole host of issues as well. There's a strain on any country's resources by taking in migrants, whether they are welcome migrants or whether they are black or brown migrants from third world countries. It does create a strain on those countries. And something has to give at some point or the other. Do you think that Zelensky should perhaps concede? Is that the right route to go? Is that going to give way too much punch to Putin? Where do we stand on this issue? Something has to give, and what is that something?
Well, I think we're at a point where neither side can give. And there certainly needs to be a negotiated end to the conflict. Neither side is going to or is able to just, lay down their weapons and say, okay, we want a ceasefire. Of course, before that, we could say that before that, Russia should not have invaded Ukraine. But also before that, Ukraine should not have been pummeling for 8 years the territory, the Ukrainian territory on the east, the largely Russian-speaking territory. So it's a little more complicated than that. But is there a possibility of a negotiated settlement? I think yes. There has to be, and there is. But the kind of talk about, for example, and everyone knows that for Russia, Ukraine joining NATO is not just a red line. I mean, it's a recipe for continued war. This has been an issue that Russia has raised for decades, and in a sense, were given kinds of assurances that such a thing will not happen, Ukraine and other countries that are on its border. But now NATO is talking about admitting both Ukraine and Georgia into the alliance. And, that kind of talk doesn't help if you're trying to find a negotiated settlement. So I think that there needs to be a scaling down of the rhetoric on the one hand, and on the other, a kind of serious negotiations taking place by some kind of a third party, which is not regarded as being on either side, where the needs of both Ukraine and Russia are seriously considered. And I say Ukraine and Russia carefully because on the one side is Russia, but on the other side is the needs of Ukraine, but also the kind of backing that it gets, and from the big brother looking over its shoulder, which is NATO. So I think that there is a possibility for negotiated settlement, but it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of insecurities that will need to be taken care of.
So what happened about Turkey's Erdogan that was trying to negotiate a settlement a little while ago? That seems to have then fallen through, or is it kind of ongoing talks that still need to happen?
Well, it did seem to have fallen through, but with these kinds of things, I mean, we do know that Turkey has played a role, for example, in the export of grain, in that whole deal. So, in a sense, both parties, both Ukraine and Russia, regard Turkey as a possible mediator, at least on some issues. It's possible that the talks around the bigger issues are continuing. And frankly, if they were continuing, I don't think that any of the parties would want to make that public. So it's possible that it's continuing. We don't know. But, also in this kind of situation, they shouldn't be relying on one track to try and reach a solution, that there should be multiple tracks where such talks and negotiations are taking place. I don't know that there are any other initiatives.
Finally, Naeem, what are the chances of this war overspilling into one of the neighboring countries? I mean, a little while ago, we heard about some sort of an issue in Poland. I think it was a missile that was supposedly misfired or mislanded. And, Russia was pointing fingers at the Ukraine and vice versa. That could lead to disaster, could it not? A situation like that, or just someone being trigger happy and pressing the wrong button. We could globally be in serious trouble.
Well, firstly, on that one, I mean, it seems clear that those missiles that landed in Poland were from Ukraine, from Ukrainian forces. The Polish government said so. The Americans said so. Everyone said so except the Ukrainians. Frankly, I mean, Putin might be extremely unpredictable, but he's not stupid. I don't think that Russia is going to launch any kind of attack or any missiles, even in this kind of pretend accident way, into a NATO member state, because that would mean a war with NATO. Right now, it's not a war with NATO; it's a war with Ukraine, which is supported by NATO, and there's a big difference. It's the same reason why the United States and certain European members of NATO, the smaller ones are out of weaponry. The bigger ones are refusing to supply Ukraine with, for example, the tanks that they're asking for, and the aircraft that they're asking for, and the surface-to-surface missiles that they're asking for. The reason being that if these were used by the Ukrainians with the surface-to-surface air missiles, if they were used by the Ukrainians to attack either Crimea or Russia itself, that would draw NATO into the war. With the planes and tanks, in order for them to operate, they would have to have NATO forces, obviously on the ground. And they don't want that to happen. So everyone is careful that this doesn't become a war between Russia and NATO. And I don't think that it will. I don't think either NATO or Russia wants that. And from the Russian perspective, again, with whatever unpredictability we know, from the Russian perspective, I believe that the end game is that they do to those eastern part or eastern republics of Ukraine what they've done to Crimea. That is that they are basically allowed to annex them into Russia,
Right.
and they would then, and the issue of Ukraine not joining NATO. The negotiations around it will have to be something bigger than just conflict between Russia and Ukraine.
Naeem Jinnah, that's where we will leave it. Thank you indeed for being with us on the show this morning. Shukran so very much for your time, and Assalamu alaikum to you.
Wa alaikum salam, Julie. Keep cooking.
I'll come for some lessons sometime soon. It is exactly 8:52 a.m. We are going to be talking with Zokele Nkwango. I hope I've said that correctly. Zwakele Nkwango. He is the Action South African Party chair, and we're going to be looking at the issue around the status of the public beaches in really a serious situation. We do hope that it's cleaned up before the holiday season starts in full force. 8:52 a.m. We're going to take an ad break, and then we'll be joined by Action SA's party chair.